Hello, my name is Cole, and welcome to my channel about piano playing and piano repertoire. So today we're going to be hearing a performance and analysis of the Schubert Impromptu in E-flat major, Deutsch number 899, number 2. So if you like what I do on this channel and you would like to become a supporter, please consider making a donation through Patreon. So I'm on Patreon at www.patreon.com/independent pianist. And on Patreon you can set up monthly pledges to really support this channel over the long term. If you prefer, though, to just make a one-time pledge, you can also do that through PayPal. So I have my PayPal link in the description box below. So thank you in advance for any support you can give. It's really going to help me to continue bringing you this content every single week. Also, if you're interested in lessons, I give lessons online to students of all levels. So if you're ambitious and you want to learn to play the piano for yourself, or if you're interested in applying for competitions or university or so forth, feel free to just drop me a message at cole@independentpianist.com and we can have a free consultation. Franz Schubert was a composer that, even more than Beethoven, really can be said to have straddled the divide between 18th century classicism and 19th century romanticism. And he did that in a number of ways. In the simplest analysis, he was one of the last composers to really be genuinely prolific in sonata form compositions. So depending on the numbering system that you look at, he wrote around 21 sonatas for piano, 15 string quartets, 9 symphonies, and numerous other chamber works that use classical sonata form as their basis. At the same time, however, Schubert was instrumental in fostering the brand new genres that would be central to the Romantic idiom of the 19th century. So in particular, of course, he's famous for his short lieder and his song cycles. Generally, these are for voice and piano. And he was genius in that field, of course, but also he was one of the earliest composers to work in the genre of the romantic character piece. He was not the only one, certainly. There are other figures like John Field. In his nocturnes, he was looking forward to Chopin, and indeed Beethoven as well, in works like his bagatelles, Opus 119 and Opus 126, was also looking forward to this new genre of the character piece. Schubert's various shorter works, though, directly presage the character pieces of Mendelssohn, Chopin, Liszt, Brahms, and particularly Schumann. I think that the Moments musicaux of Schubert and his impromptus and his 3 late piano pieces, Deutsche 946, as well as in his various dance movements, you can directly hear a link to many of the great Schumann character pieces. Schumann tended to write these sets, larger sets that were made up of shorter character pieces. So I'm thinking of things like Kreisleriana, Papillon, Carnaval, the humoresque David's Bündlertanze, and others. And there are direct correlations between the forms that Schubert uses in many of these pieces and Schumann's handling of form and also harmony and piano sound. Even the name impromptu suggests an improvisation, which was a very attractive idea for the Romantics, suggesting the quality of improvisation in their written-out compositions. And something that perhaps could have grown from his enjoyment in playing informally, improvising informally for his friends in intimate settings. In these pieces, Schubert avoids standard classical development techniques in favor of setting interesting moods and finding intriguing textures and sound worlds. The particular impromptu that we have today is reminiscent of an Austrian Landler or some other upbeat informal dance in 3. And you can hear a very typical Schubert dance rhythm in the left hand throughout the A section of the piece. It's almost as though Schubert started out writing one of his miniature dance movements, but then he got carried away with the right-hand part, which becomes more and more virtuosic and intricate and leads us into more and more extraordinary harmonic predicaments. The piece is in simple ternary form, so it's an A, B, A, with a coda. And the coda is formed from a very clever combination of the A and B sections, and that completes the piece. The B section is fairly remarkable, and Schubert seems to be attempting to create an exotic flair in this section. And this is not unusual. It was very popular at the time in Vienna to try to appropriate musical styles from other lands that were considered attractive into the homegrown music. Hungarian music was particularly popular as it was seen through the performances of Romani performers. Also, Polish music, Russian music, music from the British Isles were all considered fashionable. And in this case, I suspect that Schubert probably had Spain and Portugal in mind here. At least in this music, it makes me think of some famous fandangos that I've heard. For instance, this one by Granados from his famous piano set, Goyescas. So obviously, Schubert would not have known this particular piece. It was written almost 100 years later in 1911, but the basic movement in three and the continual kind of snappy triplet figures, which bring to my mind at least, the sound of castanets, are common features of both. So perhaps Schubert had in mind some notion of a Spanish dance like the fandango when he was writing this piece. This is only my supposition, of course. If you have ideas about what other kind of music might have been inspiring Schubert here, be sure to comment and let me know. Besides the obvious virtuosity in this movement, which is quite unusual for Schubert, another striking quality of the piece is that it begins in a major key, in E-flat major, but it ends in the parallel minor key, E-flat minor. And this is really rare. It's much more common to see the reverse situation, where a piece begins in a minor key, and then at the end there's a kind of apotheosis that leads to the major key. There are a few examples in piano music. So, for instance, Chopin has a nocturne in B major, opus 32, which ends in B minor. It's quite an extraordinary piece. And also Brahms has a very late piece, a Rhapsody, opus 119, again in E-flat major, which ends in E-flat minor. And that was almost certainly inspired by Schubert when Brahms came up with that key plan. Brahms and Schubert actually have numerous connections between them. In fact, Brahms even wrote an etude based on this very impromptu, in which he puts all of the tricky runs from the right hand into the left hand. And you almost never hear this etude performed, as it's not really so musically effective that way. But it is a very helpful study for increasing the strength and agility of your left hand. And an interesting little side note, it's just another example of Brahms's respect for Schubert. I think you can also see the mark of Schubert in Brahms's manner of composing sonata form movements also. And in fact, you can see the influence of Schubert on many of these later sonata form composers, right down to composers like Bruckner and Mahler. Even more than the influence of Beethoven, I think you can detect Schubert's influence. This is something that has been pretty much undervalued for a long time, as it was generally considered for many years that Schubert was at his best in miniatures and didn't really know how to construct large-scale works effectively. This was just because his manner of constructing a sonata form movement is completely different from Beethoven, for example, who was so revered over the 19th and 20th centuries for his compositions in sonata form. Schubert's method of writing in sonata form doesn't rely so much on intense motivic development and logical construction like Beethoven does. It's amazing, actually, the ways that Schubert finds to hold together his very expansive works without relying on the approaches that had worked for earlier classical masters like Haydn and Beethoven. In fact, I rather think that this different approach to classical form, which Schubert had, offered a kind of alternative to later composers who were trying to use these forms but felt intimidated by the shadow of earlier masters, especially Beethoven, in their search to really make these forms their own. So if you look from Chopin, Mendelssohn, Schumann, again, all the way down to Mahler, I think you can see a lot of the same approach in the way that they write these forms to some of the larger Schubert forms. So maybe we'll talk about that more when I get to some of Schubert's sonatas and some of the sonatas by these composers. So for the time being, please enjoy the performance and see you next week. I've got some unusual repertoire coming up. I have some planned repertoire from Eno Johanni Rautavaara, some unusual Schubert pieces, and also I'm planning to put up some Godofsky if I can get them successfully recorded, some pieces by Godofsky. So I also want to do some special videos on some other topics as well, besides just repertoire. So stay tuned for those. They'll be coming up soon, and thanks for watching.